Practical Anarchy, A Guide to Self-Determination, Dicky. Chapter 2, Origins of Anarchist Thought. If Chapter 1 cleared the air around the word itself, now we can get our boots muddy. Anarchy didn't just appear with mohawks and punk t-shirts. The dream of life without rulers has roots stretching back through philosophy, politics, religion and everyday struggles. Before 1900, the idea already had centuries of arguing behind it. Some called it heresy, some utopia, some simply dangerous nonsense. But the threads were there, weaving rebels, philosophers, peasants, poets and dreamers together. Part 6. Prehistoric Societies. Were we anarchists all along? If anarchism means the rejections of rulers, then the deepest history of humanity may already have been anarchist. Long before states, kings or empires, human societies lived in small groups that were broadly egalitarian. Archaeological and anthropological evidence suggest that for most of our species' existence, power was diffuse, decisions were shared, and resources were held in common. Hunter-gatherer bands depended on cooperation. To hoard food was to risk group survival. To dominate others was to invite ridicule or expulsion. Anthropologist Pierre Clastres described these as societies against the state, not simply lacking rulers but actively organised to prevent them emerging. Tools, rituals and myths often reinforced sharing and mutual respect, discouraging hierarchy before it could harden. Of course, these were not utopias. Violence, gender inequality and conflict existed, but it's the idea, inherited from Hobbes, that prehistory was nasty, brutish and short, has been increasingly challenged. Archaeological work points to long periods of relative peace, with warfare intensifying only after the rise of settled agriculture and surplus. Similarly, David Graeber and David Wingrove have argued that early societies experiment with multiple forms of organisation, shifting between more hierarchical and more egalitarian modes seasonally or contextually. The key point is not that prehistoric life was some anarchist paradise, but that hierarchy and domination are not inevitable. For tens of thousands of years, people lived without kings, prisons or states. Authority was negotiated, not imposed, survival depending on cooperation, not command. If later chapters show how money and religion come to bind us, this glimpse into our deep past reminds us that our ways of living have always been possible. It also undercuts the Hobbesian myth that chaos is our natural state, a myth we will return to in chapter 6, where religion and the state both use fear of disorder to justify control. Part 7. Ancient Glimmers, before anarchism had a name. Every king, even before anyone called themselves anarchists, the suspicion of rulers was alive and kicking. The Taoist sage Laozi was saying back in the 4th century BCE that the more prohibitions there are, the poorer the people become. His advice, step back, let people live in harmony without meddling. Zhuangzi followed with even sharper digs at rulers, laughing at pomp and ceremony. If one guy is strutting around in robes while the rest bow, something's gone wrong. Western anarchists later pointed to Taoism as a proof that suspicion of rulers wasn't uniquely European. Over in Greece, the Cynics, Diogenes and his barrel and dog-like lifestyle, mocked convention and power. He didn't preach overthrow, but he showed you could live without bowing to authority. Epicurus, too, implied a simple life in the garden with friends, free from kings and taxes. Even in Christianity's early days, there was a streak of anti-authoritarianism. Some heretical sects rejected church hierarchy, choosing communal living and mutual aid instead. Of course, the church branding them dangerous, usually a good sign they were onto something. And it wasn't just Europe or Asia. Many indigenous communities in the Americas organised without centralised chiefs. Decisions were made by councils, consensus and clan networks. Spanish colonisers sneered that these people lived in anarchy, but as Clastres argued, it was a deliberate refusal of domination. These ancient glimmers weren't yet anarchism proper, but they set the stage. Authority questions, rulers doubted. Freedom linked to cooperation. Section 8. Early modern stirrings. Heretics, rebels and radicals. Fast forward to the late medieval and early modern periods. Wherever you see peasants rising, you often find anarchic sparks. In England, the Peasants' Revolt of 1381 shouted against unfair taxes and corrupt rulers. John Bull's famous cry, "When Adam delved and Eve span, who was then the gentleman?" cut to the bone. Hierarchy isn't natural, it's imposed. Bull was branded a troublemaker, but his words echoed for centuries. Later in the 17th century, groups like the Diggers tried to reclaim common land. Gerald Winstanley's pamphlets argued for shared land and collective labour. Authority had no divine right over the soil. While the Levellers fought for broader democracy, the Diggers hinted at something deeper, a society beyond landlords and masters. The English Civil War didn't just shuffle kings and parliaments, it also cracked open space for radical ideas to spill out. In the 1640s, the new model army became more than just a fighting force, it was a hotbed of debate. Soldiers elected their own agitators to speak for the rank and file, and pamphlets poured off the presses faster than Cromwell's censors could burn them. At the Putney debates of 1647, ordinary soldiers sat face to face with grandees and demanded answers. Leveller spokesmen argued for near universal suffrage, equality before the law, and freedom of conscience. Some voices went further, questioning not just kings but property itself. Colonel Rainsborough famously declared, "The poorest he that is in England hath a life to live, as the greatest he." Cromwell and the High Command crushed the mutinies that followed, but the spark was lit. The idea that ordinary folk, even armed ones, could meet in councils, challenge their officers, and imagine equality was dangerous enough to haunt elites for centuries. The Levellers weren't anarchists, but they showed how quickly military discipline could give way to a bottom-up politics once the ranks had a taste of power. Across Europe, radical religious movements threw up similar ideas. The Anabaptists in Germany tried communal living, rejecting both church and state authority. In Bohemia, Taborites built egalitarian communities. The established powers crushed them, fire, sword and gallows, but the seeds were planted. Meanwhile, in indigenous Africa, acephalous societies showed another path. Igbo villages in Nigeria ran by assembly, not by kings. Somali pastoralists relied on councils and negotiations. Colonial officials dismissed them as chaotic, but anthropologists like Middleton and Tate later revealed sophisticated self-governing systems. Again, proof that anarchy wasn't theory, it was lived practice.